Hello beautiful people, my name is Vendi and today I'm going to be bringing you two end of the year tags. The first one is the Anti-Tbr Tag, which was created by Nicole and her books. I was tagged to do this one by my dear friend Noria from the channel Chronicles of Noria, who I'll have linked in the description box below so you can check out her video, she's amazing. And considering the Anti-Tbr Tag is all about those books that you're really not feeling, the stuff you won't be reading, I thought it would be great to follow it up with something a little bit more positive, and that is the end of the year book tag, which in a way kind of acts as a TBR of sorts for those books that you're planning to read before the end of the year wraps up and the new one begins. I was not tagged to do this one, but it's one that I wanted to be doing anyway. So here's the thing about opinions, is we all have them and they don't always mesh very well. So if you get emotive about some of the things that I express while doing the Anti-Tbr Tag, I invite you to take a minute and sort of do some self-reflection and ask yourself why it bothers you that a stranger on the internet disagrees with you. That is as close as I'm going to be doing for a disclaimer for the Anti-Tbr Tag, just because I know that some people get real heated when you disagree with their opinions. So with that out of the way, I'm going to get into the tag. The first question of this tag is, what is a popular book that everyone seems to love but you have absolutely no interest in? For me, this has to go without a doubt to A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmerer. I'm never of the belief that a certain trope or a certain retelling is overdone or over or finished or canceled or whatever, but my God, we have just so many Beauty and the Beast retellings, and from what I've heard about this one, it sort of seems to follow this sort of stock YA thing where the beast or the prince of the story is just really cardboard cutout, personality-less vanilla guy. With a fairy tale retelling, I get that there's a desire to sort of take a twist on it and make it your own, but the problem with Beauty and the Beast retellings in particular, especially in the YA realm, is that so many have been done, even those twists, etc., have become kind of commonplace. And I'm just not interested in reading what's supposed to be a retelling of technically a romance story where the main couple is a more boring couple than the main protagonist girl and, for example, the captain of the guard of the Beast character. Question number 2 is, what is a classic book or author that you just have no interest in reading? And for this, I have just truly so many answers. As far as authors go, I think the top of my list has to be Ernest Hemingway. I am not a huge fan of his writing style. I think it's a little bit pretentious. As a person who majored in English literature, it's very difficult to avoid Hemingway in all of his shapes and forms, particularly when you have professors who think that he is God's gift to the written language as a whole. I've just heard far too many takes from far too many white men in professor positions that everyone who followed Hemingway either mimicked his style or acted in complete 180 opposition to his style and is therefore equally as influenced by him. And I'm just like, he's not that influential. His works were, at best, in my opinion. And the way he treated women in his real life just leaves a lot to be desired, so I have no interest in reading Hemingway. Question number 3 is a two-parter. It's either what is an author that you have no interest in reading or what is a problematic author that you have no interest in reading. And for me, elephant in the room, Joanne Kathleen Rowling. I'm not going to be picking up anything she writes ever again. Like many people on BookTube, I've not made it a secret in the past that Harry Potter was a deep and beautiful part of my childhood. It is how I learned to read in English. It's how I lost my Croatian accent when I was very young. So those books have a very special spot in my heart. However, the things she's written after Harry Potter hold no interest for me, and from what I've tried of them, I haven't really enjoyed. Also, she's a TERF, and I do not believe in separating art from artists. I don't think it's possible when the artist is still alive and will benefit monetarily or like image-wise from you mentioning her. And I realize in doing this, I'm mentioning her on my channel, so I'm actually gonna stop doing that right now. Question number 4 is, what is an author that you've tried and you've just decided is not for you? For this, I have to say Stephen King. The only thing I've read of Stephen King's is It. And that's like 1,000 pages of King, so I feel like even though it's only one book, I've still got like a pretty firm grasp of what he's about as a writer. And while I'm not a huge horror reader as a whole, what I do want for my horror is for it to scare me, and I want the ending to kind of close the story, and I don't really feel that either of those things are kind of in Stephen King's wheelhouse, so I'm not going to be picking up any more of him, I don't think. Question number 5 is, what's a genre that you're not interested in or that you tried and failed to get into? When I first read this question, my initial immediate gut response was to say erotica, but I've read enough fan fiction that that's just patently untrue. So what I think I'm gonna have to say is those like pulpy, mass market, like action man misogyny thrillers, if that makes sense. I'm talking about things like Tom Clancy novels, etc., that all have names like, you know, Point Blank, and have like a silhouette of a dude with weapons, and he's like a beefcake, and he's like walking dramatically into like, I don't know, like a cityscape or some shit. I don't know. There's a lot of gray and like dark blue on those covers. And whenever I look at them, I'm just like, I've never been less interested in reading a thing. Question number 6 is, what is a book that you bought that you will never read? With a caveat that this can be a book that you have already unhauled, or a book that you borrowed from the library and just never even tried. And for this, I don't have an answer. When I buy books and when I borrow books from the library, I buy them with the intention of at least attempting them. So there's not really a book that I've borrowed from the library and haven't at least tried a little bit before letting that hold expire and get it out of there. And as far as books that I buy and own tangibly, I'm deeply stubborn. So usually if I buy those books, I will keep going and I will keep trying to find something I like about them, and then I'll get rid of them. I don't buy books and then just not read them. It's not a thing I do. Question number 7 is, what is a series that you're not interested in, or a series that you've started but will not finish? This is another easy one for me. Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. I read the first book and hated it. The anachronisms by themselves would have been enough for me to seriously rethink reading a historical fiction series based on a really, really prolific serial killer anyway. But on top of that, the romance was just a disaster. The not like other girlsing of the protagonist was something I could not stomach even a little bit. And I think even like my 13 or 14-year-old self, who was most forgiving of that trope, would have been like, to read Audrey Rose, I think her name was. The plot was predictable, the characters were insufferable, and I didn't like it. I will not continue that series. And the final question number 8, is, what is a new release that you have no interest in reading? And I'm gonna be super boring for this one and just say Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. This is Twilight, but retold from Edward's point of view. So he's watching Bella, and listen, I don't care enough about Twilight to have like nostalgia for it in a big enough way for me to want to read Midnight Sun. And even if I did have that nostalgia, Edward's point of view is something that simply does not draw me as a 23-year-old adult woman who does not like controlling men. I almost said I can get past the stalking, but I can't get past the absolute lack of sexual agency that Bella gets to have in that relationship because of him. But you know what? I can't get over the stalking. That was weird. That was bad. And I also, I don't find it romantic that he was this close to murdering her for like 90% of their relationship. I don't. It's not cute. And I don't want to live in that headspace for like 800 plus pages. It's just not something I'm interested in. On the other hand, there are a bunch of books that I am interested in and that I do plan to be reading by the end of the year, which is my really awkward way of segueing into the end of the year book tag. Question number 1 of the end of the year book tag is, what is a book that you have started that you want to finish? And for that, I have to say Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. This is the 3rd book in the Farseer Trilogy. I have been buddy reading this series with my friend Katie from the channel A Sea of Tomes, who of course will be linked in the description box below. Hi, Katie. This is one of Katie's absolute favorite series, and it's quickly becoming one of mine. The Farseer Trilogy follows a young man named Fitz, who is the bastard of the abdicated king-in-waiting of the 6 duchies. After his father abdicates, Fitz is brought into the royal castle where he is trained as the king's assassin. And despite the circumstances of his birth, he is pulled into a world of political intrigue, both from within as the various political factions and royal families begin to butt heads once the king's reign appears to be coming to a slow end, and from without as the 6 duchies begin to be raided by seemingly soulless people from the out islands. The Farseer Trilogy follows Fitz's life as he goes from depressed and lonely child to deeply angry and chaotic teen to just tired and loyal and angry and vengeful young adult, and I'm very, very excited to see how his story concludes. I mean, I say concludes, there are fully 2 more series that follow Fitz within the realm of the Elderling saga altogether, but as far as this story goes, I'm excited to see how it ends. Question number 2 is, do you have an autumnal or wintry, I guess now, book to transition you into the end of the year? And I do. I plan to read The Girl in the Tower, the second book of the Winternight Trilogy by Catherine Arden. This series opens up with BookTube's darling, The Bear and the Nightingale. It follows Vasya, the youngest daughter of an old Russian noble, who is seen as strange by all of the people in her land, not only because she bucks up against the sort of expectations placed on femininity for young women at her time, but also because, unbeknownst to most people, she can see the domovoi and other spirits of the hearth and home and wilds beyond in the land of Russia. And because she can see them, she's sort of drawn into this plot to use the power and the magic that she has to protect her human people from a sort of winter demon known as the bear, while also defending herself from the human people that she is trying to save. Because like I said, she doesn't quite fit into the molds of femininity that are prescribed to her, and that is a deeply dangerous thing for a young woman to do in her time. I absolutely love The Bear and the Nightingale, and I'm excited to see what happens to Vasya next. The title of this book makes me a little nervous. I don't know what's going to happen to her because I've been going into this series relatively blind, but just the isolationist sort of imagery that's given with the tower and the title, etc., makes me nervous. I don't want them to lock her up, but I worry that might be where it's going. I don't know. I don't know if I can take that after 9 months and counting of self-isolation. I'm still gonna read it though. Question number 3 is there a new release that you are still waiting for? And this late in the year, not really. I'm more excited for books that are coming out next year, such as the continuation of the Witchlands series by Susan Dennard. But as far as 2020 releases that are still coming out in the last 2 weeks of December, not really. The next question is, what are 3 books that you plan to read before the end of the year? For that, I have to say A Dream So Dark, the sequel to A Blade So Black by L.L. McKinney. This is a retelling / reimagining of the story of Alice in Wonderland. The tagline of it is, what if Buffy went down the rabbit hole instead of Alice? And I think that describes it to a T, and I'm just very, very excited to continue Alice's story. And the next 2 books are some ARCs that I received earlier in the year that I've been meaning to read, but I've been slumping very, very hardcore, and they are The Girl in the Witch's Garden, a middle grade by Erin Bowman, and The Princess Will Save You by Sarah Henning. This is The Princess Bride retelling. And for these 2 in particular, I want to read them because they're ARCs, and that's what you do with ARCs. You read and review them, and you don't sell them on Depop at a super, super marked up price, because that would be both probably illegal and deeply, deeply immoral. The next question is there a book that could still shock you and become a favorite of the year? Now, I really don't know that too much could dethrone the Poppy War and Get a Life Chloe Brown for me for the year of 2020. However, The Enchanted Sonata by Heather Dixon Walwork is a book that I'm going to be buddy reading with my friends Katie, again from A Sea of Tomes, and Kara from Wild Book Garden, and it is a Nutcracker retelling, and that's all I really know about it, except for that Katie and Kara really love it. So, I mean, I trust Katie and Kara, I love the Nutcracker, and I love to buddy read, and buddy reading generally increases my enjoyment of things, so who knows? Who knows? It might be a 3-way tie for 2020. We'll see at the end of this buddy read. And the final question of this tag is, have you started making reading plans for 2021? I have. During the still wintry months of 2021, I plan to continue reading kind of wintry books to sort of get that cozy vibe going, since, I'm not going to be leaving my house much. For that, I'm going to be reading The Winter of the Witch, concluding the Winternight Trilogy by Catherine Arden. I also finally plan to read Sherwood by Megan Spooner, which is a Robin Hood retelling. And I also plan to continue and conclude more series by reading things such as The Queen of Atolia by Megan Whalen Turner. Additionally, as you may notice on the shelves behind me, I have some books turned backwards. The books where you can see the pages instead of the spines are the books that I own that I have not read. My goal for 2021 is to turn those spines outward for as many of those books as possible. But my sort of goal with turning them backwards like that is to keep it kind of blind, because in theory, I want to read all of these books. But if I pull one of them and I'm just like, and I say, 4 or 5 times after pulling it, I know that it's probably not a book that I want to keep. So it might be time to say goodbye to it and move it on to another home. But I hope that's not what happens. I hope I read and love as many of them as possible. But that's really my only main goal of 2021, is to get my physical TBR down, because it has grown. And that brings me to the end of the year book tag, and therefore to the end of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, please leave it a thumbs up, and if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I post videos or at least I try to, every weekend, and I would love for you to become part of my little booktube family. Comment down below if any of the books that I mentioned that I will be reading are things that you think I should prioritize, or if that's not in the wheelhouse, and I get it because commenting takes energy and that's difficult to come by during the holiday season, just leave me a heart. I could use it. I could use some love. Any color is fine, but because it is like the wintry times, I think blue would be especially nice to receive. But again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you with the next video very, very soon. Goodbye.